Hello, and thanks for joining me today. My name is Lisa from Youth Services, and I would like to welcome you to the first episode of what I am calling Folktale Fridays, where I read classic fairy tales and folk tales from around the world for your listening pleasure. Everyone is welcome to listen in, but please be aware that this is mostly meant for older children, such as tweens, or even older audiences like teens and adults. Little ones are more than welcome to listen in, but parents, please be advised that sometimes classic fairy tales can get pretty dark. If that ever happens and I'm reading a fairy tale that does get darker, I will put a disclaimer in there. But if you're uncomfortable with it or even just a little hesitant, I strongly recommend just tuning into the children's department's regular story times that are posted on Facebook. So that way you don't have to worry about it. But that said, today I'm going to start by reading some classic fairy tales from one of my personal favorite authors, Hans Christian Andersen. He is a Danish author, of course. A little extra background is he was a Danish author, mostly known for his fairy tales. He was born on April 2nd, 1805, and died on August 4th, 1875, at the age of 70. His fairy tales consist of 3,381 works and have been translated into more than 125 languages, so I'm not the only one who loves him very much. Famous fairy tales of his include classics such as The Little Mermaid. In fact, this one's so famous that in his city of Copenhagen, Denmark, there is a statue of The Little Mermaid. He also wrote The Snow Queen, The Princess and the Pea, The Ugly Duckling, Thumbelina, Little Match Girl, Emperor's New Clothes, and my absolute favorite of his, The Steadfast Tin Soldier. Any of the fairy tales that I read from him will be read out of my personal copy of Hans Christian Andersen, The Complete Fairy Tales and Stories, translated from the original Danish by Erik Christian Haugaard. So with that said, let's begin. The story that I'm reading today, of course, to start off with, is The Steadfast Tin Soldier. So, The Steadfast Tin Soldier. Once there were 25 tin soldiers. They were all brothers because they had been made from the same old tin spoon. With their rifles sticking up over their shoulders, they stood at attention, looking straight ahead in their handsome red and blue uniforms. "Tin soldiers!" were the first words they heard in this world, and they had been shouted happily by a little boy who was clapping his hands because he had received them as a birthday gift. He took them immediately out of the box they had come in and set them on the table. They were all exactly alike except one, who was different from the others because he was missing a leg. He had been the last one to be cast, and there had not been enough tin. But he stood as firm and steadfast on his one leg as the others did on their two. He is the hero of our story. Of all the many toys on the table, the one you noticed first was a pasteboard castle. It was a little replica of a real castle, and through its windows you could see right into its handsomely painted halls. In front of the castle was a little lake surrounded by trees. In it, swans swam and looked at their own reflections because the lake was a glass mirror. It was all very lovely, but the most charming part of the castle was its mistress. She was a little paper doll, and she was standing in the entrance dressed like a ballerina. She had a skirt of white muslin and a blue ribbon draped over her shoulder, which was fastened with a spangle that was almost as large as her face. The little lady had her arms stretched out as if she were going to embrace someone. She stood on one leg, and at that on her toes, for she was a ballet dancer. The other she held up behind her in such a way that it disappeared under her skirt, and therefore the soldier thought that she was one-legged like himself. "She would be a perfect wife for me," he thought, "but I am afraid she is above me. She has a castle, and I have only a box that I must share with 24 soldiers. That wouldn't do for her. Still, I would like to make her acquaintance." And the soldier lay down full length behind a snuff-box. From there he could look at the young lady, who was able to stand on the toes of only one leg without losing her balance. Later in the evening, when it was the children's bedtime, all the other tin soldiers were put back in the box. When the house was quiet and everyone had gone to bed, the toys began to play. They played house, hide and seek, and held a ball. The 24 tin soldiers rattled inside their box. They wanted to play too, but they couldn't get the lid open. The Nutcracker turned somersaults, and the slate pencil wrote on the blackboard. They made so much noise that the Canary woke up and recited his opinion of them, all in verse. The only ones who didn't move were the ballerina and the soldier. She stood as steadfast on the toes of her one leg as the soldier did on his. His eyes never left her. Not even for a moment did he blink or turn away. The clock struck 12. Pop! The lid of the snuff box opened, and out jumped a troll. It was a jack-in-the-box. "Tin Soldier!" screamed the little black troll. "Keep your eyes to yourself." The tin soldier acted as if he hadn't heard the remark. "You wait till tomorrow," threatened the troll, and disappeared back into its box. The next morning, when the children were up and dressed, the little boy put the one-legged soldier on the window-sill. It's hard to tell whether it was the troll or just the wind that caused the window to open suddenly and the soldier to fall out of it. He dropped down 3 stories to the street, and his bayonet struck in the earth between 2 cobblestones. The boy and the maid came down to look for him, and, though they almost stepped on him, they didn't see him. If only the tin soldier had shouted, "Here I am," they would have found him. But he thought it improper to shout when in uniform. It began to rain. First one drop fell, and then another, and soon it was pouring. When the shower was over, 2 urchins came by. "Look," said one of them, "there is a tin soldier. He will do as a sailor." The boys made a boat out of newspaper, put the tin soldier on board, and let it sail in the gutter. Away it went, for it had rained so hard that the gutter was a raging torrent. The boys ran along on the sidewalk, clapping their hands. The boat dipped and turned in the waves. The tin soldier trembled and quaked inside himself, but outside he stood as steadfast as ever, shouldering his gun and looking straight ahead. Now the gutter was covered by a board. It was as dark as it had been inside the box, but there he had 24 comrades. "I wonder how it will all end," thought the soldier. "I am sure it's all the troll's doing. If only the ballerina were here, then I wouldn't care if it were twice as dark as pitch." A big water rat that lived in the gutter came up behind the boat and shouted, "Have you got a passport? Give me your passport!" The tin soldier didn't answer, but held more firmly onto his rifle. The current became stronger, and the boat gathered speed. The rat swam after him. It was so angry that it gnashed its teeth. "Stop him! Stop him!" the rat shouted to 2 pieces of straw and a little twig. "Stop him! He hasn't got a passport, and he won't pay duty!" The current ran swifter and swifter. The tin soldier could see light ahead. He was coming out of the tunnel. But at the same moment he heard a strange roaring sound. It was frightening enough to make the bravest man cringe. At the end of the tunnel, the gutter emptied into one of the canals of the harbor. If you can imagine it, it would be the same as for a human being to be thrown down a great waterfall into the sea. There was no hope of stopping the boat. The poor tin soldier stood as steady as ever. He did not flinch. The boat spun around 4 times and became filled to the brim with water. It was doomed. The paper began to fall apart. The tin soldier was standing in water up to his neck. He thought of the ballerina, whom he would never see again. And 2 lines from a poem ran through his mind. "Fare thee well, my warrior bold, death comes so swift and cold." The paper fell apart, and the tin soldier would have sunk down into the mud at the bottom of the canal had not a greedy fish swallowed him just at that moment. Here it was even darker than it had been in the sewer. The fish's stomach was terribly narrow, but the soldier lay there as steadfast as he had stood in the boat without letting go of his rifle. The fish darted and dashed in the wildest manner, then suddenly it was still. A while later, A ray of light appeared, and someone said, "Why, there is a tin soldier!" The fish had been caught, taken to the market, and sold. The kitchen maid had found the soldier when she opened the fish up with a big knife in order to clean it. With her thumb and index finger, she picked the tin soldier up by the waist and carried him into the living room so that everyone could admire the strange traveler who had journeyed inside the belly of a fish. But the tin soldier was not proud of his adventures. How strange the world is! He was back in the same room that he had left in the morning, and he had been put down on the table among the toys he knew. There stood the cardboard castle and the little ballerina. She was still standing on one leg, the other she had lifted high into the air. She was as steadfast as he was. It touched the soldier's heart, and he almost cried tin tears. And he would have, had it not been so undignified. He looked at her, and she at him, but never a word passed between them. Suddenly, one of the little boys grabbed the tin soldier, opened the stove, and threw him in. The child couldn't explain why he'd done it. There's no question but that the jack-in-the-box had something to do with it. The tin soldier stood illuminated by the flames that leaped around him. He did not know whether the great heat he felt was caused by his love or the fire. The colors of his uniform had disappeared, and he could not tell whether it was from sorrow or his trip through the water. He looked at the ballerina, and she looked at him. He could feel that he was melting, but he held on as steadfastly as ever to his gun and kept his gaze on the little ballerina in front of the castle. The door of the room was opened, and a breeze caught the little dancer, and like a sylph, she flew right into the stove. She flared up and was gone. The soldier melted. The next day, when the maid emptied the stove, she found a little tin heart, which was all that was left of him. Among the ashes lay the spangle from the ballerina's dress. It had been burned as black as coal. The end. I know, kind of a bittersweet ending, and you can interpret that in so many ways. My personal favorite interpretation, which is why I love this story so much, is that I interpret that the ballerina loved the steadfast tin soldier just as much because of how steadfast he was, just because he had one leg. So even though he just had that one leg, he was still sturdy and going strong as ever, and she really admired that. So I like to think that when the door opened, she allowed herself to be carried by the breeze to the fire, because she would rather be with him than be without him. And so that's why this is one of my favorites. And I hope that you all enjoyed this just as much as I did reading it. And I hope that I will see you next time. So until then, please take care and have a wonderful day.